Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise this morning and speak to this Senate bill, which seeks to amend a statute, a law that was brought into being by the Liberal Party of Canada in the last Parliament. In fact, our former colleague in this House, John Godfrey, brought to the floor the Sustainable Development Strategy Act for the country, which this Senate bill seeks to amend. It's important to take a few minutes, I think, Mr. Speaker, to remind Canadians and to remind the House just what's been happening over the last 15 or 20 years. I'm really proud to be the environment and energy critic of a party that did a number of things. First of all, it brought into being the Commissioner for the Environment and Sustainable Development, an independent or quasi-independent commissioner office working with the Auditor General, which gave rise to the need for sustainable development strategies in the first place for most of our line departments and a number of agencies, for example, like the RCMP and others, who are obliged on a biannual basis to actually prepare a strategy showing how they would get from point A to point B over that 2-year period of time. So I'm very proud that our former government created the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development. I am on record, and the party's on record here, as wanting that Commissioner's office freed up from its location, I should say, in the Auditor General's office today. We really are in favour of a more independent Commissioner for the Environment and Sustainable Development reporting directly to this House. So in that sense, the bill brought forth by the other place here is reinforcing of the need for more independence, more visibility of these reports, more visibility for the work, I should say, of the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development. I'm also very proud to be part of the government that actually brought in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which is the foundational statute. It's the architecture upon which we build most of our environmental protections in this country, our regulations. And I'm also particularly proud to have helped this party in its role as a previous government to bring in the Species at Risk Act. Again, a major biodiversity protection initiative brought forward by our government in years past. These are the foundations of what we're doing now as a country as we look to enhance ecological integrity, environmental integrity, while growing our economy. Unlike the other side of the House here, Mr. Speaker, the Reform Conservatives have always put forward a view that the environment and the economy are two competing interests. Unfortunately, they are very far behind in contemporary thinking, and in the last 4 years we've seen that Canada's been now put behind not only in contemporary thinking but in contemporary action. We see south of the border in the United States, in some instances, a 15-fold advance, 15 times more investments going into things like renewable energy than we are doing here on a per capita basis. Even the governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin, is investing more in renewable energy than Canada is. So we're in the unenviable position now of losing the North American competitive race towards a more energy efficient economy. And that, of course, is there and plain for all Canadians to see. Nowhere is that more prominent than in the quintessential and difficult issue of climate change. We've had now 4 years of reform conservative government. It's important to remind the House of a few things around this notion of climate change because it speaks directly to this bill, Mr. Speaker, climate change forming a huge part of the challenge we're facing in this country that will have to be addressed in any sustainable development strategy brought forward by a federal government. The problem, of course, is that we come from a position on the other side in the Reform Conservative caucus led by the Prime Minister that's ideologically opposed to a number of notions. First of all, it is ideologically opposed to the notion that Canada, as a rich, comparatively rich citizen of the world, has an obligation to move first. As one of the Annex I countries under climate change treaties, move first to show the way and to take action domestically to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. When you do that, you actually enter the race more quickly, Mr. Speaker, than you would otherwise. And now, because we've wasted 4 years of time under these Reform Conservatives, The Canadian situation is that we are falling behind our competitors in Europe and falling behind, as I mentioned moments ago, the United States of America, our largest trading ally and perhaps our largest competitor. So what we've seen is an ideological opposition to Annex I countries like Canada, wealthier countries, developed countries, going first. The second thing that Canadians are seeing and that we are bucking in this House of Commons is a reform conservative ideology that rejects the notion that the world should come together in a multilateral way, that is through organizations like the United Nations, where many countries come together. They reject this notion because our Prime Minister was schooled really at the heels of the Republican movement and party in the United States. It's important, factually, and for the record, to remind Canadians that the Prime Minister gave a keynote speech some 9 years ago to the most right-wing organization in the United States, the American Council, and behind closed doors, not knowing he was being caught on tape again, said that, that this group, this council, this most right-wing of all think tanks in the United States was his personal inspiration, Mr. Speaker. He went on to say that not only was it his inspiration, not only was their ideology his inspiration, but he wanted to import that ideology, he went on to say, up here into Canada. And we've seen the systematic importation, infiltration, inculcation, the surreptitious insertion of this kind of ideology right here in this House through the climate change debate. And the reason why it's important for Canadians to know about this, Mr. Speaker, is because deep down the Prime Minister is not a multilateralist. He doesn't believe in the United Nations. And I recall when he was Leader of the Opposition attacking this government because we were even considering creating the G20, which it turns out is something he's now embracing. But the reason he is so opposed, Mr. Speaker, is because deep down he is an isolationist. Because he's on record as saying that if it's not in favor of the United States, it's not something that he would endorse. So should any Canadian be surprised, Mr. Speaker, last week when the Prime Minister revealed publicly in a speech that he doesn't, according to him, does not watch Canadian newscasts, rather spending his time on CNN and Fox News, where he's given more interviews than he has to domestic broadcasters. So what we're seeing, Mr. Speaker, in this bill is a strengthening of a law that was brought in by a Liberal member to force our country to be more coherent when it comes to dealing with the concept of sustainable development. That is, development that enhances ecological integrity while strengthening our economy and creating jobs. Creating jobs. Jobs for today, not speculative, fictitious jobs of tomorrow, jobs for today. That's what this bill in the Senate seeks to do. It seeks to strengthen an existing law brought in by the Liberal Party of Canada. In closing, Mr. Speaker, it's very important for Canadians to use this opportunity to ask the Reform Conservatives where their climate change plan is. We heard expert testimony in committee this week that the government has no plan, that it will first hide behind President Obama's skirt by alleging that they're in some kind of dialogue, while they undermine, for example, smog standards for fuels used in our Great Lakes. On the one hand, they say they're pursuing a dialogue. On the other hand, for climate change on some kind of continental basis, Mr. Speaker. They can't have it both ways. They have to clarify. But they really have to explain now, Mr. Speaker, in closing, why it is they're not using this particular bill and the law that we gave this country to strengthen our climate change response so we can win this energy-efficient, clean economy competition that we are now involved in. We're falling so far behind after 4 years of reform conservative rule. Is it any wonder that we're losing so much investment to the south of the border and other jurisdictions, Mr. Speaker, with respect to climate change technologies? Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise du débat.